And this is part 2. Since this book is so long, I decided to divide into 2 parts, part 1 and 2. We stopped at chapter 15, so I'll continue reading. We'll start with Flip-O-Rama. Chapter 15, the incredibly graphic violence chapter, part 1 in Flip-O-Rama. Introducing Flip-O-Rama. Here's how it works. As any historian will tell you, Flip-O-Ramas were first created nearly 200,000 years ago on stone tablets. These cheesy animations were lots of fun to flip, but they were so heavy they often resulted in smashed thumbs and broken fingers. Ancient Egyptians, desperate to solve this problem, invented papyrus around 3,500 BC so that Flip-O-Ramas could be flipped safely by everybody. So please enjoy this ancient tradition, now improved and enhanced by the modern-day miracle of paper. Okay, now let's see. Boulder Bash. Okay, they're continuing to destroy Tippy Tinkle Trousers. It's a boulder now. They smashed 2 boulders onto his ears. Rhinoplasty. They bought a rhino and the rhino attacked Tippy Tinkle Trousers with his horns. And timber trauma. One of the cavemen installed a trap and give Tippy a wedgie. And now that's it. Chapter 16. What really caused the Ice Age? Is that all you get, moaned Tippy as he fell to his battered, smoldering knees. Tippy's gigantic robotic pants might have been a technological marvel, but they were no match for caveman cleverness. Tippy was in trouble, but he still had one last trick up his sleeve. He reached down to his control panel and pressed the Freezy Beam 4000's button. Suddenly, the battered top of the RoboPass opened up, and the Freezy Beam 4000 was maniacally from the robotic innards. Instantly, a massive burst of ice blasted at the cave people. Fortunately, they all got out of the way just in time, but the ice kept blasting anyway. "What's wrong with this thing?" said Tippy as he pressed the Freezy Beam 4000's off button repeatedly. The button was stuck, so Tippy pulled the emergency shut-off lever. That it wouldn't budge either. "It's almost as if anyone has just tampered with the control panel," said Tippy, unaware that tiptoeing across the floor at that very moment was someone who had just tampered with his control panel. Slightly younger Tiny Tippy, still angry that he had been betrayed by his treacherous twin, had rigged the Freezy Beam 4000 so that it could never be turned off. Now the ice beam was going berserk. Glaciers of synthetic ice programmed to last for 70,000 years cascaded from Tippy's Freezy Beam 4000, encasing the trees and securing its robotic feet to the frozen ground. Things were getting out of control. Tippy quickly crawled under his command center, desperately trying to figure out a way to turn off the spewing icebergs. It was slightly younger Tiny Tippy's chance. He reached out of his global gloves and grabbed the Goosey Girl 4000. Then, with a mighty leap, he jumped through the opening at the top of the robotic legs and hopped down to the frosty ground below. The ice was spreading at a dangerous rate. Slightly younger Tiny Tippy needed to act fast, with no time to spare. He grabbed a piece of bubblegum from his pocket, chewed it up, read the comic on the wrapper, and jammed the sticky bubblegum into the button of the Goosey Girl 4000. "Now," said slightly younger Tiny Tippy, "when I press this button down, it'll stick." That's exactly what happened. Berserk! A continuous beam of gross energy burst forth from the goose-shaped contraption. Quickly, slightly younger Tiny Tippy jumped into the energy beam and grew to an impressive 30 feet tall. "Awesome!" pressed out the younger Tiny Tippy as he jumped in front of the beam again and again, like a child leaping through a lawn sprinkler. Each time he hit the beam of energy, he grew another 30 feet. "I'm huge!" said slightly younger Tiny Tippy, who was now towering above the earth at an impressive 120 feet. He reached down to pick up the Goosey Girl 4000 with his robo glove. "Just a few more zaps and I'll be..." "Whoops!" cried slightly younger Tiny Tippy as the Goosey Girl 4000 slipped out of his robo glove and tumbled down onto the thick ice below him. Unfortunately, the continuously zapping beam of energy was now pointed directly at the gigantic mountain of ice, which caused it to grow and expand and spread out even farther. Quickly, the ice began pushing its way east across the Ohio Valley and west into the part of the Earth that would one day be known as Indiana. And it began shoving its way north into Michigan and Canada and beyond. An accidental glacial period was developing rapidly, and slightly younger Tiny Tippy needed to get out of there fast if he wanted to avoid it. Chapter 17. Have a nice day. George and Haru grabbed their pets and ran as fast as they could to escape the rapidly spreading ice fields. Their caveman friends were right behind them. Poor Cracker, said George. You've got to take Sulu and get out of here. It's your only hope. But something was wrong with Crackers. The usually perky but tall doctor seemed to be getting sick. Maybe he's catching a cold, cried Harold. He's not used to the freezing temperatures. Soon they came upon the massive waterfall where Mr. Crab was tied up. The ice was already beginning to turn the flowing water into frozen sludge. We got to rescue Mr. Krabs, said George. But there's no time, said Harold. We'll all get frozen. We don't have a choice, said George. We can't just leave him there. George and Harold ran toward Mr. Krabs and began pulling at the vines holding him in place. When the cave people saw what the boys were trying to do, they also stopped running and came forward to help. But it was too late. The ice got closer and closer as everyone pulled desperately at the vines in the rapidly freezing water. The frigid slushy water wrapped around Harold's shirt as thick as encased George's body. Oh, well, said Harold as he shivered in the rapidly expanding permafrost. At least we will try our best. Goodbye, said George as the ice flowed up around his face and covered the top of his head. The end had finally come for George and Harold. It was all over. The only hope they had left was that maybe someday in the future an archaeologist would dig up their fossilized bones that have a lot of explaining to do. But even that hope seemed far-fetched at best. Chapter 18. Something much less far-fetched. Crash! Suddenly the ice around George and Harold and their cave people friends shouted with a mighty karate chop. You didn't think I'd leave you behind, did you? Said slightly younger Tiny Tippy as he scooped everyone up with one gigantic shovel of his rubber glove. Everyone held on to one another for warmth as slightly younger Tiny Tippy trudged south across the frosty glaciers. It was about this time that George and Harold realized that Mr. Crab's face was no longer wet. It had been freeze-dried, along with everything else around them. So they snapped their fingers and suddenly our miraculous hero returned. Gee, it's been nippy today, said Captain Underpants. Forget about that now, said George, shivering. Quickly, he and Harold filled Captain Underpants in on the severity of the situation, and before long they all had a plan. Captain Underpants flew out of slightly younger Tiny Tippy's rubber glove and grabbed his massive belt buckle. With one sensational swoosh, Captain Underpants ripped Tippy's pants, belt and all, right off of his robo-legs. Hey, no fair, screamed slightly younger Tiny Tippy as he stood shivering on his gigantic robotic boxer shorts. Captain Underpants quickly tied and ripped its pants legs in a knot and told everybody to climb aboard. Soon, all of the good guys were tucked securely into the polyester cotton blend trousers and flying someplace safe and warm. They zipped across the vast ocean and finally came to a place that was now covered with ice. Captain Underpants flew down and landed near the Chavez Point, the arcade in southern France. George and Harold said goodbye to their cave people friends. We sure hope you like your new home here, said George. Keep drawing, said Harold, and take care of our paws, Crackers and Sulu. Okay? Wait a minute, said George. Can't leave our pets here. Crackers is sick. He needs to see a doctor. Oh yeah, said Harold. I almost forgot. Got to get to the future somehow. Quickly, Captain Underpants flew George and Harold and Crackers and Sulu back to the frozen glaciers of North America. If they were ever going to get back to modern times, slightly younger Tiny Tippy was their best bet. Chapter 19. The Vow. When their 5-year-olds finally reached slightly younger Tiny Tippy, he didn't seem at all surprised to see them. "I'm not at all surprised to see you," said slightly younger Tiny Tippy as he sipped casually from his water bottle. "I bet you guys want to ride back to the future, don't you?" "We sure do," said Captain Underpants. "Gee, that would be swell." Slightly younger Tiny Tippy pointed his water bottle at Captain Underpants' face and squeezed. Splash! "Well, what the heck is going on here?" said Mr. Crump. Their 5 heroes began falling to the frozen ground below. "String Harrowed, you're doomed!" Fortunately, slightly younger Tiny Tippy caught them before they hit the ground. But unfortunately, he had something even worse in mind for them than a 120-foot drop to their deaths. As slightly younger Tiny Tippy set his Tinkle Time travel meter for a date in the upcoming future, George and Harold bemoaned their continually recurring predicament. "Whoa, here we are again," said George, "back in the same mess we always end up in." "I know," said Harold. "It seems like every time we crack a joke or make a comic book, something terrible happens." "You know," said George, "if we ever get out of this mess, I think we should stop goofing around all the time." "Yeah, I agree," said Harold. "We need to quit making comic books and start paying more attention to our schoolwork." And as blue, crackling light began to envelop them, George and Harold made a vow to change their ways. They pledged to give up pranks and jokes and comic books, and they promised to begin taking life seriously and to start acting like responsible grown-ups. "Wow," said George as they all disappeared into a crackling whirlpool of liquid time. "You were mature already." "Me too," said Harold. Chapter 20. 30 years from now. Suddenly, a giant ball of blue lightning exploded in the southern end of a busy Midwestern city. George and Harold looked around them and saw the familiar sights of cars and houses and fast food restaurants. "We're home!" cried George. "It sure seems that way," said Harold. "But how come everything looks so old?" "Because we're not back where we started," laughed slightly younger Tiny Tippy. "You're 30 years in the future." "Why did we come to the future?" asked George. "Because," said Tippy, "the last time I got rid of Captain Underpants, the whole road was destroyed. I just wanted to make sure that the road would survive the next 30 years without him, and it looks like it can." Tippy marched over to the elementary school and placed George and Harold and their 2 pets on the ground. "Get comfortable, boys," said Tippy. "I'm about to destroy Captain Underpants once and for all, and I want you kids to have the best seats in the house." George and Harold looked up in horror as slightly younger Tiny Tippy began knocking Mr. Crump around like a beanbag. "I can't watch," said Harold as he petted his pet pterodactyl, who only seemed to be getting sicker. The two scampered around the playground, finding twigs and branches and leaves, and weaving them into a nest to help keep Crackers warm. "Remember," said George, "if you ever get out of this mess, you're going to straighten up and start acting like grown-ups." "That's right," said Harold as he placed Crackers into the warm nest that Zulu had made. "You're going to be responsible and mature from now on." As Tippy kicked Mr. Crump like a soccer ball, George and Harold got distracted by a loud commotion behind them. 2 teachers were yelling at the students on the playground, instructing them all to stop paying attention to the fierce struggle raging above them, and demanding that they straighten up and start acting like grown-ups. As the battle intensified, the obnoxious teachers screamed louder and louder, hurling threats and insults at the curious students. "Boy, I sure wish those 2 teachers would chill out," said George. "I know," said Harold. "They're yelling so loud I can't even hear the fight." Suddenly, a rusty green 2034 Honda Civic pulled into the parking lot, and a familiar-looking character came storming out. It was Mr. Crump, only this was a 30-year older version of Mr. Crump. He was wrinklier than George and Harold were used to, with a scuffy white beard and mustache and pants pulled up to his armpits. Mr. Crump marched toward the playground, opened up his mouth, and screamed 4 words that sent shivers down George's and Harold's spine. "Mr. Beard! Mr. Hutchins!" George and Harold froze. "Oh no," whispered Harold. "Our Mr. Crump recognized us." "What are we going to do?" asked George. "How are we ever going to get out of this mess?" Oh, Mr. Crump marched towards George and Harold, getting closer and closer as they shivered in horror. Then old man Mr. Crump walked past George and Harold and continued walking through the playground. "Mr. Beard and Mr. Hutchins," he screamed again. "Get those kids inside right now." "Who is he talking to?" asked George. "I have no idea," said Harold. Finally, the two screaming teachers turned around. Chapter 21. Jordan Harrow's worst nightmare. You know that feeling you get when your stomach sinks? It usually occurs just after the realization that something bad has happened or is going to happen. People often feel this way when they discover they forgot to study for a big test, or they're going to miss their school bus, or the giant gulp of milk they just swallowed expired 3 weeks ago. Now imagine the feeling magnified about 1 billion times. This is the feeling that occurred in George's and Howard's stomachs when the two obnoxious screaming teachers turned around. It was them. More preciously, it was future versions of themselves. George and Howard had grown up to be teachers, but they weren't the nice, wonderful, imaginative teachers that you might be used to. No, sir. George and Howard had evolved into terrifying, boring, and vengeful teachers that they were used to. Mr. Crow squished between 40-year-old Harold and 39-and-3/4-year-old George and slapped a sweaty arm around each of them. I'm sure I'm glad you fellas are here," said Mr. Crow. "It's tough job making everybody miserable, isn't it?" "It sure is, boss," said 40-year-old Harold. "You know, it's hard to believe that you guys used to be the craziest kids in the school," said Mr. Crow. "Thank goodness you both started taking life seriously." "Yeah," said 39-and-3/4-year-old George. "One day about 30 years ago we saw the error of our ways, so we made a vow to straighten up and fly right." Yep, said 40-year-old Harold. "From then on, it was nothing but serious study, strict discipline, and hey, you kids, cut that out!" George and Harold looked nervously at each other after adult doubles continued screaming at the unfortunate children on the playground. Remember that vow we just made to stop goofing around and start acting more like grown-ups?" asked Harold. "Yeah," said George. "Then we should vow a new vow that unvows the old vow we just vowed," said Harold. "Let's get vowing," said George. So as the terrifying battle raged above their heads, George and Harold shook hands and promised to always be themselves. They pledged to keep goofing around and to make even more comic books, and to stop taking life so darn seriously. "Let's daydream more too," said George. "Yeah," said Harold. Enough of the sitting still and paying attention stuff. As George and Harold vowed their new vows, something strange began to happen. The soft wind started to blow, the sound of wind chimes began to tinkle in the air, and the grown-up versions of George and Harold slowly disappeared. They vanished gradually at first. Then after about a minute or so, Mr. Crab was left standing there all by himself. "Wow," said George. "You mean it's that easy? All you have to do is make up your mind and stick to it and you can change the future?" "Yeah, I guess so," said Harold. George and Harold walked up to old Mr. Crab, who was looking a little confused, and snapped their fingers. Suddenly, a familiar smile stretched across old Mr. Crab's face. "Well," said George, pointing up at the terrifying battle exploding above their heads, "what are you waiting for?" "Yeah," said Harold, "you're getting your butt kicked up there. Go help yourself." Quickly, old Mr. Crab tore off his clothes, dashed into the school, grabbed the red curtain from his office, and flew out of his window with a triumphant tra-la-la. Old Captain Underpants immediately rescued Mr. Crab and brought him back down to the ground. "Wow, I'm sure glad that's over with," said Mr. Crow. "Relax, Bub," said George. "We're just getting started." And with the snap of George's and Harold's fingers, Mr. Crow returned to his heroic self once again and flew into the sky to fight alongside the future self. Chapter 22. The incredibly graphic violent chapter part 2 in Flipporama. A fistful of nose hairs. Okay. They're tickling Tippy's nostrils. A sky-high kick in the eye. Now they're kicking his eyes. The tooth hurts, or now they're hurting their teeth. They're pulling down the cheeks. Tippy has. And now let's go right into the next chapter. Chapter 23. How the universe really began. Slightly younger Tiny Tippy might have been ginormous and powerful, but he was no match for two Captain Underpantses. He fell to his massive robotic knees in a thunderous cloud of recognizing defeat. Boom! But slightly younger Tiny Tippy wasn't ready to give up just yet. He reached down to his control panel and pressed the nuclear bomb button, which is conveniently located between the strawberry milkshake button and the low-fat mint chocolate chip cookie dispenser. Suddenly, a panel at the rear of the robo-boxers opened up, and the 160-ton thermonuclear bomb emerged. "You might have to feed me," said slightly younger Tiny Tippy, and he pressed the button. And that started the countdown to doomsday, but I'll still get the last laugh. Suddenly, a light on the side of the bomb began to flash red. A computerized voice emanating from the bomb's arming system began the countdown. "This bomb will detonate in 60 seconds, said the voice. "No," screamed George. "The last time one of those bombs went off, it killed all the dinosaurs." "But this bomb is way bigger than the last one," cried Harold. "This bomb will blow up the entire planet." "Correction," said the younger Tiny Tippy. "I've just activated my gravitational levitator, which will give this bomb more destructive power than a supernova. This thing's gonna blow up our entire galaxy. This bomb will detonate in 30 seconds, said the computerized voice. "Doomed again," screamed Harold. "Well," said George, "it was fun while it lasted. So long, old friend." "Bye," said Harold. As the two friends shook hands, a huge gust of wind almost blew them over. Smoosh! With Crackers and Zulu, George and Harold's pets whooshed by them as they flew up to the opening of the radioactive robot boxers and flirted down to the command center inside. Zulu's bionic brain quickly figured out the complex control panel of the Tinkle Time Travel Meter, and together the two animal friends began mashing down the buttons on the switchboard. "This bomb will detonate in 15 seconds, said the computerized voice as Crackers feverishly picked at the controls. Finally, Zulu pushed down hard on the "Away we go" button, and the radioactive robot boxers were enveloped in a gigantic ball of blue light. Suddenly, the radioactive robot boxer and the three occupants were zapped back in time 13.7 billion years ago, back to a time before time existed. Before anything existed, there was no Earth, no sun, no planets, no universe. There was nothing all, except for the computerized countdown on a 160-ton thermonuclear bomb. This bomb would detonate in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Chapter 24, to make a long story short, kabloosh! Chapter 25, the big kabloosh theory. The heat from the exploding supernova caused the universe to spring into existence and expand rapidly. As it expanded, it also began to cool, allowing its energy to be converted into lots of different subatomic particles. It wasn't long before these particles combined to form atoms, which combined to form matter, which combined to form stars and planets and you and me and everything around us. Scientists usually refer to this event as the Big Bang Theory. But to be honest, the explosion sounded was more like a kabloosh than a simple bang. I guess it just had to be there. Chapter 26. What have we learned today? Remember at the beginning of this book when I told you you'd be smarter by page 210 than the world's most brilliant scientist? Well, congratulations! You know what's killed the dinosaurs who started the last ice age and how our universe actually began. Unfortunately, this information is not something you can use for any practical benefits. If you ever get tested on this stuff in school, please don't answer with the truth. I can guarantee you it will not go well. This is the unfortunate fate with super smart people like us. This is really a place where we can use our vast knowledge, so we must be content to simply roll our eyes at our people, shaking our heads patronizingly, and sing that inspiring old song "I'm smarter than you, na 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 na." For your convenience, cheat music has been provided on the following page. You can see that this boy got an F as a scientist answering the questions about how the world was generated. Okay, now let's read the first question. When how did the universe begin? Was slightly younger Tiny Tippy blew up a giant nuclear bomb 13.7 billion years ago? That actually is correct in this book. What caused this to happen? A pterodactyl and a bionic hamster. What is the theory called? The big kabloosh theory. How did the dinosaurs become extinct? The Tippy-Tinko Trail that exploded in Mexico 65 million years ago. What caused the last major ice age? The 3DB 4000 combined with the Goosey Grow 4000. Who made the world's first drawings? George and Harold. It says it's all correct in this book, but he got an F in this quiz. So make sure you don't do that, and I won't. Oh yeah, I'm smarter than you. Music and lyrics by Albert Einstein. Okay. Chapter 27. Meanwhile, 30 years from now. Where did they go? Cried George as he looked up into the sky where Tippy's radioactive robot boxer had just stood. They disappeared, said Harold. They just vanished without a trace. Captain Underpants and his bearded old twin flew down to George and Harold. What are you going to do now? Asked old Captain Underpants. Why don't you go fly into that school and splash some water on your face, said Harold. Sure thing, boss, said old Captain Underpants. He flew straight to the nearest drinking fountain, and in no time at all, he returned to his crabby old self. Well, said George, what are we going to do now? We're stuck in the future without a time machine. George, said Harold as he looked down at Cracker's nest. We've got no money, no identification, or no nothing, said George. George, said Harold again, looking closer into the nest. It's not like we can just go back to school and start over where we left off, said George. George, said Harold a third time. What's after finally? Harold pointed at the nest that Zulu had made for Crackers. In the center of the nest were 3 purple and orange speckled eggs. George's mouth dropped open. What are those? He cried. I guess Crackers wasn't sick after all, said Harold. He was pregnant. But Crackers is a boy. Boys can't lay eggs. Maybe Crackers is a girl, said Harold. Oh yeah, said George. I guess that would make more sense. George and Harold carefully picked up the eggs and examined them. We've got to keep these eggs going until Cracker and Sue get back, said George. Oh, we don't know where they went, said Harold. We don't even know if they will be back. Then we're just going to have to raise these eggs on our own, said George. That's the least we can do. Chapter 28, the final chapter of the very last Captain Underpants epic novel. George and Harold and Captain Underpants each held an egg close to their bodies to keep them warm. Then they started walking. Where are we going to go? Asked Harold. I guess we should try our houses first, said George. Maybe our parents still live there. Good idea, said Harold. Suddenly, a bright ball of flashing light appeared in front of them. The flashing got more and more intense until it finally exploded with a blast of crackling lightning. And there, where the flashing ball of light had been, was a gigantic, glow-in-the-dark robotic squid. The top of the robo-squid opened, and George and Harold's nemesis, Melvin Sneely, popped his head up. Greetings, said Melvin. I have come from the past to bring you guys back home. Hey, wait a minute, said George incredulously. How did you know where to find us? This an old friend led me to you, said Melvin. Okay, said George. Works for me, said Harold. You see, Melvin continued. When I designed Zulu's robotic endoskeleton, I installed a boring, said George, interrupting. Yeah, said Harold. We stopped listening like 10 seconds ago. Well, listen to this, Melvin shouted as he reached down and grabbed our heroes with his robo-squid arms. You 3 losers and your precious eggs are coming with me. Where are you taking us? Cried George. You'll see soon enough, Melvin laughed maniacally. You'll see soon enough. Suddenly, the gigantic glow-in-the-dark time-traveling super squid began to shake and sputter in a buzzing ball of electrified light. Oh no, cried George. Here we go again, cried Harold. And that's it for the 10th novel of Captain Underpants. It isn't the end. We have the 11th novel and the 12th novel. We have 2 books left. And if I see the news, Captain Underpants 13 is coming out in November 2022. Okay, I'm recording this in June now, and it's 5 months later, so I'll also film this, so I can actually film 3 books of Captain Underpants this year. If you're watching this in 2022. Okay. We're just looking at like time traveling about life, yeah. Stuff like the science. Right? I think like I read all of the Captain Underpants books, the 12 books, but like 9 and the 10 was the most fun to me. Like time traveling, everything was great, okay? So I hope you liked that video, and the full read aloud book video is also coming soon, okay? So make sure you stick to that, and I hope I can see you in the next one. Get ready, everyone. Captain Underpants 11 is coming soon.